Reference is always an issue when working on a portrait commission. And part of the reason is most of the time I don't actually know the person who I've been commissioned to draw. I've never met them, and I'm kind of relying on the reference that I've been provided for the most part. So in the case of this assignment, this was a person that I painted for Sierra Club, who's a magazine that I've worked with many times over the years. I pretty much do a portrait for each issue quarterly at this point. But with a lot of these portraits, the reference I'm given is just kind of a selfie, or it's a group photo that's cropped to show the person. It's not something that somebody took in a studio, and it's also not a person that I can, do some research on online and find a bunch of other angles. So there's a lot of limitations. And in order for me to make the portrait work the way that I tend to render things, a lot of times I need to exaggerate the contrast. I need to make the lighting a bit more dramatic in certain spots. And so since the reference won't actually show me that, I'm kind of left to trust some of my anatomical knowledge. So in this case, I've got a reference image I'm working off of that has some definition around the nose, eyes, the corners of the cheeks. I can tell where the light is coming from, but I need to really accentuate it, exaggerate it in certain spots. And, just knowing the way that the skull informs the planes of the face and the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of light and where highlights would go and where midtones would go. That's kind of coming in handy a lot right now. So before I begin any portrait, I send over some sketches to the art director, and they will look it over a lot of times with their editor, and then they'll kind of make a decision based on the person or the tone of the article, which portrait, which facial expression they want to go with. So with this one, I had to send over some sketches, and I kind of figured out at that point where to exaggerate some of the lighting, where to play with shadow and light and that sort of thing. And at this stage, what you're seeing is the sketch that I do before I paint. So when I draw things out, I like to really make sure I nail the drawing before I paint. Even though I could dive in with paint and do this ahead of time, for a paid commission like this, I trust myself to draw it out better and then paint over top of it a lot more than I do to just kind of dive in with paint and experiment. So after I've finished the drawing, and that's color pencil on Bristol paper, Bristol vellum paper, then I find kind of a unifying color, which in this case is this bluish gray tone. It's kind of a steel gray. And then I cover the entire portrait in that color. And I put a little swatch of color in the background too, which kind of helps to just sort of solidify things. It also gives a sense of looseness to the piece, which I like to try to maintain as I render. Then after I get that color down, I'm putting in a little bit of the clothing color, and then I'm going to go in with some line work and kind of outline some of the edges again. And you can still see the drawing come through at this point, and even by the time this is finished, you'll still see some more of the line work coming through, which is something I tend to do in my pieces. I like the pencil to just be part of the finished piece. I don't really mind that it's visible. I'm not trying to hide it. So after I get some of that line work in, I'll go in with some of the darker tones, and things are going to be a little bit grayer, a little more muted, less vibrant in the beginning, because I tend to work on the shaded areas first and then go into areas of light. And it's not like one and then the other. It's kind of a dance between the two. So as I brighten things up, I'll still go into the shadow areas and maybe add more colors. I like to kind of mess with the color too, and sometimes I'll add areas that are a little more green or a little more blue. But you might not be able to tell at this point, but that undertone color is also really shining through. Even though the paint is very opaque, it's still kind of dictating things a little bit. So that's something that I think about as I paint. It's a color that is going to have a relationship with the piece throughout the course of the painting, even if the color gets very, very thick. So now I'm getting slightly brighter. These colors might even look gray at this point, but then once they're surrounded by brighter colors, then they can come a little more together and help sort of describe things in a more bright, colorful way. But at this point, they do look a lot grayer and cooler, I should say. So as I do color on this side of the face here, another thing to consider is that I don't really work on one zone, one part of the face. And even if this were a larger painting, a more compositional narrative piece, I do tend to try and spread the color around. So for example, some of the whiter areas in the teeth that I'm putting in, those were created using some of the colors that I actually used on the face. And that's not because there's going to end up being a lot of flesh tone colors in the teeth or in the whites of the eyes or anything, but by mixing those colors together and by spreading those colors all over this painting, I'm making things a little more cohesive. So as I put this color down, and this isn't even a very bright yellow necessarily, but it's brighter than what's down there. And what I'm sort of hoping is that as I get this color down, some of the parts that I've already added on the face will look a little bit brighter. It'll kind of brighten everything up a little bit. Or there's also a chance that as I'm adding these colors, there will be parts that look a little too gray, and then I need to maybe amp them up more. And then this part of the hair has a little bit of blue in it, so it ends up looking slightly greener, almost like a sage green by comparison. So adding in a few more highlights on the hair right here. On this person's hair, what I'm trying to do is do long strokes to kind of accentuate how straight it becomes, especially towards the bottom. The other thing that happens oftentimes with portraiture is, you always want to make the subject look younger than the photo they might have given you, or more flattering. So even though the reference image might have had, gray hairs in certain areas or lines by the eyes, I'm trying to be honest with this piece to make sure that I nail the likeness, but I'm also trying to make the subject look a bit more youthful in some ways. I'm not trying to lie entirely, again, because it has to look like the person, but there's things that you can do with paint that will make it look like a nice flattering painting, as opposed to if it's a photo that they wanted to work with and they just photoshopped everything. So I'm adding the highlights on the eye right here and signing it right at the bottom. And then you'll see the full piece in a second, and you'll see what this looked like when I scanned it in and sent it over as a high-res TIFF file. There we go. So thanks everyone for tuning in.